Now, the BuckeyeXtra podcast with Rob Oller, Bill Rabinowitz, and Joey Kaufman from the Columbus Dispatch.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our preview edition of the BuckeyeXtra football podcast. I'm Joey Kaufman, joined by Bill Rabinowitz, Rob Oller. On tap for you this week is Ohio State and Iowa. I think by this point in the season, this is actually, especially what we saw the first four games of the year, should be a pretty good test for the Buckeyes. On paper, Iowa has as good a defense as you're going to find in the country, and so we're gonna learn a little more about Ohio State, even though they're 20-point favorites. I think this game should be a good barometer for where the Buckeyes stand going into Oregon next week. How are you both feeling?
I feel fine, Joey. Thank you for asking. Yeah, this is the biggest test Ohio State's had because it's Iowa's defense is the best unit that Ohio State has faced. I mean, their offense is what it is. It's better than it was under Brian Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz's son. It's still not great. Cade McNamara is, not an elite quarterback. He's experienced. He's 24 years old. He's been there. I mean, he was in Michigan. Ohio State fans remember him in Michigan. But the key is for their offense is Caleb Johnson. He's a second leading rusher in the country. He's a real weapon. So if Ohio State lets him have a huge game, then it's gonna be a battle. If they shut him down, doesn't get 100 yards, say, I think Ohio State wins pretty comfortably, no matter how good Iowa's defense is.
Yeah, I agree with Bill. I would say this: I'm not ready to buy the Iowa defense being like some world-class defense. I know the statistics and all that. I think will it be a test? Yeah. The end of the day, I think the points for 20 point spread, 20.5.
He was
Buckeyes cover would be my take. And I just don't think that Iowa has the horses, even defensively to stop Ohio State. That's just, I know it's a good defense. I think sometimes it's living off a rep a little bit because Kirk Ferentz is this defensive guru, and his defensive coordinator has been there a long time. I'm not saying they're not good. They are good. But I'm with Bill, too. Offensively, they're not going to be able to do as much. I think probably, the running back gets some yards early, as it seems like every team does against Ohio State. And then Ohio State adjusts and shuts him down. Does he get 100 yards? Maybe. That's probably not good if you're Ohio State, because if he gets 100 yards, might be a closer game than I think it'll be. But I don't see this being a true test. I asked Ryan Day at the press conference Tuesday. He didn't really want to talk about it. He said he'll reflect on it later. But we've talked about this, the ladder of our progression of talent and competition. And it's kind of, I guess you can look at it either way. You want that real tough game early like they've had in the recent years. But this seems like it sets up really well with, three lukewarm, to be kind, teams. Michigan State, decent, and then you go to Iowa, at least better defensively than Michigan State. I'm not sure Iowa's better offensively than Michigan State, and Michigan State only scored 7 against Ohio State. They've got a better running back. So, and then that leads into Oregon. So I think this is just another step that they should not stub their toe on.
This game almost feels to me like a Ohio State-Wisconsin game from past years, where there's so much focus on the back that Ohio State is facing, where in Wisconsin it was guys like Jonathan Taylor, last year was Braylon Allen, and all the guys they had before that. And none of those guys ran for all that much against the Buckeyes. When you become so one-dimensional on offense, I think it's just limits you so much. They do have Cade McNamara at quarterback, who obviously Ohio State fans remember from 3 years ago in Ann Arbor, where he was the quarterback for Michigan and led them to a win. But he's still a physically limited quarterback. He's not going to pick you apart in that sense. So this is still a one-dimensional team, but Caleb Johnson is a good running back. He gets a lot of yards after contact. He can fight for tough yards. Jim Knowles talked about this on Tuesday, where you have to make knockback tackles, where if you're going to tackle him, you need to make sure you hold him at that spot or knock him back, because he has an ability when you hit him to then get 2-3 more yards, which is really what Iowa wants to do. Is they want to just gain 3-4 yards, 3-4 yards at a time, and have these long sustaining drives. Which, hey, and we've talked about that maybe that's the way to beat Ohio State is to have long sustaining drives and eat clock and all that. And maybe Iowa could do that, but still, to me, I think that we've seen so many times over the past where teams that are so run heavy just ultimately can't beat Ohio State. Maybe Michigan's the exception to that rule, but generally against like the Big Ten West iteration of the conference, that's been the case.
We shouldn't forget Luke Lachey, Jim Lachey's son, is their tight end, and we know Iowa's history of great tight ends. I mean, that's a tight end factory. He's the latest in that line. He was coming off an injury from last year, and he's back. So I'm sure he'll have some supporters in the stadium. And if you're looking at weapons in the Iowa passing game, probably start with him. But I don't think that I just don't think that Iowa. I mean, the passing yards in this game could be really lopsided, and that's probably where Ohio State has the biggest edge. It's just Iowa's got a good defense, and they're probably going to make Ohio State settle for a lot of stuff, a lot of shorter stuff. But Ohio State's just their athletes are just better than Iowa's. I mean, that's just what it is.
I do want to see this Ohio State rushing game, which has looked so much better through 4 games than it did at any point last year. They're averaging almost 2 yards per carry better than they were in 2023. This is a much better front. Iowa has good linebackers. So I think this is going to be a much better barometer for just how effective they are running the ball, because they could have trouble. And we could look back on this game. We could be talking about this in our post-game pod where maybe the soft schedule caught up to them a little bit, and maybe they're not quite as good running the ball as we think they are. Or it could be a game where, wow, you're even more impressed by Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson and the way the offensive line is opening stuff up for them. So I think it's going to be a game where you can maybe start to be a little more definitive about where they are running the ball.
I'm curious how much they'll try to run the ball. I don't know enough about Iowa's secondary to know how susceptible they are, but I know you've got Jeremiah Smith, I know you've got Emeka, and I know you got Tate, and that's pretty dangerous stuff. So I was going to have its hands full. Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I think it could be a test for the running game if it's pretty much a 50-50 split balance of run pass. I don't know if it will be. I think they always preach that that's what they'd want to be, but I didn't even look at the stats. You have stats from Michigan State. Do we know the breakdown there?
The stat I was going to give you is about Iowa's secondary. It's not as good as it's been in the past. It seems to have regressed a little bit. They've given up some.
Well, there you go.
Some big plays, so maybe that's an area where Ohio State could exploit. When they played Troy, they gave up a 63-yard touchdown and a 62-yard touchdown. So it's maybe something that Ohio State will try to do. We've talked about maybe them trying to push the ball downfield more vertically, and maybe this is the team to do it against rather than running straight into their linebackers who are very disciplined.
They had Iowa State all but beaten, and then let them off the mat, and Iowa State came back and beat them at the end. So, I don't think that this is a particular – I mean, I think this is a standard Iowa team. I don't think it's a special Iowa team, maybe with the exception of Caleb Johnson. This is a game at home that Ohio State should win comfortably. I mean, if it was, funny things happen on the road, we remember the Iowa game, and what year was that, 18? Can't remember what year it was, 17 or 18,
20
Fix up the Iowa and Purdue games, but that was one of those games at Iowa where just everything that could go wrong went wrong for the Buckeyes, and that tends to happen on the road. Doesn't tend to happen at home very much. And Ohio State is 42 in a row, I think it is, or 42-0 for day against unranked teams. They just haven't lost these kind of games.
I think the thing to know about Iowa is they're more similar than not to when these teams faced in 2022. Iowa comes to the Horseshoe in October with a really good defense. Ohio State ultimately won that game 54-10, but Brian Ferentz was the offensive coordinator and just continued to hold them back to such a degree. I think people are just partly more bullish on Iowa this year because you have a new offensive coordinator in Tim Lester, you don't have the coach's son holding you back, and you have a really good running back in Caleb Johnson. And so it's not that Iowa is this, I guess, massive juggernaut, but you now have a defense which has already been one of the best in the country in recent years that now is going to be backed by a semi-competent offense rather than truly being one of the worst in all of the FBS. So that's kind of, I think, the situation at hand for the Buckeyes is you're facing a more respectable unit and outfit in Iowa, which now has an offense which can at least do some things, which is more than they could do 2 years ago, because the only touchdown they scored 2 years ago was a defensive touchdown where I think Donovan Jackson gave up a pressure and either CJ had a strip sack or a pig. I can't remember exactly what the turnover was, but that was the only time Iowa got in the end zone was from their defense.
I mean, Brian Ferentz, you could almost say ran like a Woody Hayes offense. I mean, it was like so. You remember, Rob? You remember at the end of the Woody Hayes era, people were saying that the game had passed them by. And I mean, in the last couple of years of Woody, that's what had happened. And for Brian Ferentz to just run that off, I mean, it was painful to watch. They would just run the ball, and if they got a first down, they'd run the ball, and eventually they'd punt, usually sooner rather than later. There was little imagination. Their receivers are pretty much non-factors. So yeah, Tim Lester is an upgrade by default, just because he is competent and
he's breathing.
So, yeah, I mean, it was insulting, honestly, that Iowa held on, kept Brian Ferentz as their offensive coordinator as long as they did, because it's one thing to be conservative and kind of play Woody ball or trestle ball or whatever you want to call it, but you got to be able to do something offensively, show some creativity, try. And they were just content to just punt and win on defense. You can't win that way. So, yeah.
Do you remember the first play 2 years ago by chance? Spencer Petras was Iowa's quarterback, and they just threw the ball right to Ohio State secondary. It was just a total gift where they were around midfield and just dropped back and went right into their hands. I mean, it was almost Bad News Bears level.
Yeah, it was painful to watch their offense. So, yeah, they have a really good running back. McNamara is not the most talented guy around, but he's experienced. I mean, he's seen it all, and he's a tough guy. So he gives him a fighting chance. But see, the guy is going to throw for 300 yards? No, I'll be shocked if he does.
One thing about Ryan Day, and maybe all coaches say this, but I've been struck by him. He said this before, and he's not the type of coach. This kind of gets back to the run-pass balance as I'm sitting here thinking. He's not the type of coach that's going to try to prove something. Some coaches maybe would try to prove, we're going to try to prove we can run the ball, even if it's not going well. He's a definitely take what they give you. And his whole thing, he says it before, we got to win this game. He doesn't really worry about too much other than winning the game. And he does, getting other guys in. I think the question was about a chance to play more guys. I can't remember the exact context of his answer, but it was, we got to win this game. And so we're not going to mess around. If that means we have to throw it every down, and that helps us. If throwing every down is going to help ensure that we win the game, that's what they'll do. That's my takeaway from Ryan Day, which is a very NFL, again, I know I always harp on this, is a very NFL mindset of, we're not here to prove anything. We're here just to get the W. So I just found that interesting. He was so emphatic with that.
So what's your takeaway? They're gonna not try to prove a point by
I don't know what they're gonna, what is there to prove? I mean, we haven't really talked about that. Where's the weakness? What do they still have to, what's Ohio State still have to prove? That their D line is up to snuff. I mean, again, nitpicking. Yeah, it kind of got I wouldn't even say exposed is a little strong. They got picked apart a little bit early against Michigan State, and then gave up 7 points and locked down the second half. And and Tyreek wasn't in there, and he's going to be back, right? Maybe I don't know if that's news, but so that will probably help them. I don't know what there is to prove if you're Ohio State. I guess again, broken record. I want to see what Will Howard does against a really good defense. And what you guys are telling me is that Iowa's secondary isn't incredible. Now, I don't know what their pass rush is like. I mean, Ohio State's like what, third in the nation? Is that right? In protection, something ridiculous. So they really are protecting Howard really well. If that continues, listen, Ohio State has so much talent at wide receiver and running back that if you give Will Howard time, I don't care if he does lock on to guys, he's going to find guys and he's going to beat you. And so you better get pressure on Will Howard this week. And I just don't know if that's the strength of Iowa.
I would push back on the idea that Iowa State doesn't have much to prove at this point. I think they have something to prove against teams that are sort of in their same weight class, because they've shown they can run the ball better than they did last season, but they have not faced the stout Big Ten front like Iowa, and bigger tests are coming with Penn State, Oregon. And so I think that's still the question mark, is the offensive line, the running game looked better, and certainly the influence of Chip Kelly goes into all of that. But it's just been, I think the toughness label, and can they run the ball, can they protect the quarterback, is going to persist until they achieve some of their biggest goals, which is beating Michigan and finish atop the Big Ten. So I think you still want to see them maybe improve in that area or show something a little more against a tougher competition.
Yeah, Michigan State did gash them a little bit in the first half, and it wasn't just the first drive. If Michigan State had turned the ball over twice deep in Ohio State territory, and Cody Seidman had that stuff on fourth down at the Ohio State 20, it's a different game. I mean, it's 38-7, but it didn't feel like 38-7 for most of the game. Yeah, they dominated the second half, but it really didn't turn until late in the second quarter. And so I think Ohio State wants to show that it can, first of all, shut down an offense entirely, a credible offense, which, again, Iowa is just because of Caleb Johnson. And then I think that on offense, they want to impose their will. Okay, Iowa doesn't give you much. Well, let's see what Ohio State can take while also not being so greedy that they risk turnovers. It's that balance I think they've got to strike.
Yeah, I'm not sure Ryan Day offense is an impose your will offense. And I'm not saying they're not tough. I just, from day one, it's been a finesse offense that's talent. They are not a Michigan lineup and just blow you off the ball and try to run it down your throat team. I just think there's too many other weapons. They try to spread it around. So I agree they have to show that they are capable of being able to run the ball against a good D line like Iowa. So I'm with you there, Joey and Bill. But I guess what I was saying is, in terms of nothing to prove, maybe that's me sort of putting not much stock in Iowa. I think they do have something to prove against Oregon when that game comes. But this, again, I am not sold on Iowa's defense. They may prove me wrong.
The number one defense in SP plus.
Yeah,
you're nuts. What?
It's the eye test. The eye test. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying what's being sold. Again, I'm not saying they're terrible. I just think that they won't be a huge problem for Ohio State. To your point, Joe, it's fair, totally fair, though, to say, well, this is a test to find out if that's the case.
That's all. That's what I'm saying. I think is, like, if Ohio State comes out and runs the ball as effectively as they've been doing in recent weeks, and they're 6 yards per carry or more, I think that would be a really good day for the Buckeyes, and you should feel better about yourself as an Ohio State fan as far as the status of the run game, which was a work in progress since last year, and I think so that's sort of the issue I think at hand, is they have something to prove in that respect. It's less to prove a point, but just what we can learn that's more revealing about this team. And I think it's potentially the most important thing we could learn.
I think the bottom line is a moderate test. It's certainly a bigger test than they faced. It's not as big a test as they're going to face next week, or against Penn State, or against Michigan. But it is a moderate test. It's probably on the level of Nebraska, probably a little bit higher than that, because Nebraska hasn't proven they can win a close game. But, it's a step up from Michigan State, I think. Michigan State was a funky team because, Aiden Childs, he had a good arm. I mean, when he made some plays, for a guy who's been as erratic as he's been, he made some plays, and their running backs had some nice runs. But overall, I think Iowa's a much sounder team. I mean, I don't think Iowa's going to fumble the ball twice deep in Ohio State territory. I just don't think that's going to happen. So Iowa's not going to give you anything. I just don't think they're quite good enough to stop Ohio State from taking enough.
Here's a question I got for you, Joey, because you're the stat breath man. Oregon, we're talking about Oregon all test. Is Oregon's defense better or as good as Iowa's?
Not on paper, no. But Oregon's offense is significantly better.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I get that.
McNamara. Jeez.
Well, I get that. No, I get the offensive side. But I'm guessing, we're talking about they'll have a bigger test. Ohio State's off. So really what you're saying, and it's probably accurate, is Ohio State's offense will be tested more Saturday against Iowa than it will be against Oregon on paper.
Well,
yes and no. Yeah, they're going to need to be better next week against Iowa because they're going to, this week, 21 points might be enough for Ohio State to beat Iowa. 21 points next week is probably not going to be enough to beat Oregon.
I think so much of the game changes when you're going against a more complete team, too. It's like, sure, on paper, Iowa's defense is better than Oregon's, and maybe it's harder to move the ball, and maybe Iowa gives up fewer yards per play and makes you work for it as well. But Oregon's also going to play at a faster pace, and their offense is going to be able to score. So it's you're getting into a little more of maybe a potential track meet type game where you have to respond quickly because the tenor of the game changes too. If Ohio State gets up and they get a 2-touchdown lead over Iowa, you can almost go into cruise control. But if you're playing a team like Oregon's going to be able to move the ball effectively when they have possession to sort of raise the stakes, I think, which I think changes the way quarterbacks have to manage the game and the way you have to call the game and all of that too. So that's to me, I think that's you have to factor those sort of things and those sort of elements as well. And the environment of Austin Stadium will be different than obviously what we'll see Saturday. Anything else you're interested in seeing from this one?
Not really. I think when you play Iowa, there are really not a lot of surprises. You got to play mistake-free football. You take what they give you, you impose your will enough, and you come away with a win. I mean, if you're Ohio State, unless something funky happens.
Is McNamara 1-0 versus Ohio State as a starter? Or is he?
He is, yes.
Yes, so, yeah.
Yeah, because they didn't play in 2020.
Right.
Okay, there's a little wrinkle. There's a little trivia for you.
It's interesting because I almost forgot about that whole storyline. Cade McNamara 1-0 against Michigan until earlier in this week, and I couldn't really muster a lot of interest in that one. If it was Hassan Haskins playing Ohio State,
they might take him back in a heartbeat right now with their quarterback.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they just can't throw. But anyway, we talk about that every week, I think.
Yeah,
we'll get to them.
The Michigan passing update.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. I think that just about wraps it up for our Iowa preview. Hopefully, we learn a little more about where the Buckeyes stand as the Hawkeyes come to town for a 3:30 p.m. kickoff. CBS. Thanks for joining us on this edition of the BuckeyeXtra Football Pod. I'm Joey Kaufman. That was Bill Rabinowitz and Rob Oller. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned and follow us at dispatch.com for more coverage following the game and your podcast feeds for our post-game podcast, which we'll download a day or so after. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Be sure and subscribe to the BuckeyeXtra podcast in the iTunes Store, the Google Play Store, or on Stitcher.